She kept a ledger in her head, not written down anywhere, nothing so formal as ink on paper, just a running count she carried behind her eyes the way a soldier carries the weight of the dead. Silently, constantly, without ever setting it down. Lie number 1. He told her the posting was temporary. 6 months at the Farron diplomatic station on the outer ring of the Meridian Compact, then home to the Thornwood territories where her people built their cities from living stone and sang their histories into the bark of elder trees. 6 months. She had packed accordingly. She was still there 2 years later, and he had stopped mentioning the timeline entirely. Lie number 2. He told her his work was administrative. Coordination, he said. Translating the endless bureaucratic static between species who could not agree on the temperature of a meeting room without 4 subcommittees and a formal grievance period. He was, he told her, a paper pusher in an interstellar machine so vast and so stupid that it barely noticed him. She believed that for almost a year, right up until the night she found his second communications terminal hidden under a false floor panel in the storage annex. The encryption on it was military grade. She knew what military-grade encryption looked like. Her father had been a war commander before the compact made war unfashionable. She did not confront him then. She noted it in her ledger and watched. Lie number 3, and this one she filed under a different category. The kind she did not have a clean name for was the one where he looked at her each morning across their narrow, shared table, watched her wrap her hands around a cup of pressed bark tea that she brewed because nothing else on the station smelled like home, and let her go on believing that she was the person he came back to. That category of lie required no second communications terminal. It required only the particular stillness of a man who has decided that a truth will cost him something he is not willing to pay. His name was Commander Aldrich Varron, human, 41 years old, brown hair going silver at the temples in the way human hair apparently did when they were pressed by time and responsibility. He had a mouth that curved easily into something that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else, and the first time she saw it she had thought, this man knows exactly how much to offer and exactly how much to hold back. She had found that interesting. Interesting had been her first mistake. Her name was Kara. Just Kara, the way her people named their children, one word, one sound, no title until you earned one. She was the junior diplomatic attaché representing the Thornwood Collective at the Farron station. She was 28. She was tall even by the standards of her people, which made her very tall by any other standard, with the green-gray skin of the Highland Orc clans. The amber eyes that her grandmother had told her were the color of the first light through mountain fog, and the small paired tusks at her lower jaw that she had spent an adolescence learning not to be ashamed of, before she realized that shame was something other people were trying to hand her, and she was not obligated to take it. She had a diplomat's careful stillness and a soldier's posture, and she had loved Aldrich Varron with the unhelpful thoroughness of someone who does not do anything halfway. She was thinking about all of this while sitting in Observation Bay 7 of the Farron station, watching a compact fleet mobilize in the dark outside the window. It was not a small fleet. She counted 17 warships from the Meridian line alone, the long, blade-shaped vessels that moved through deep space the way a knife moved through water, elegant and cold. Behind them, 3 of the enormous tribunal carriers, each one large enough to hold a city inside its hull, their running lights blinking in the slow, patient rhythm of very large things that have nowhere to be in a hurry. Around all of it, a corona of smaller craft, interceptors, diplomatic escorts, the little automated sentinel probes that the compact deployed whenever a situation had graduated from concerning to potential war crime. All of this, she had been told 30 minutes ago by a man who could not look at her while he talked, was because of a lie. Not her lie, his. She had gone looking for the truth 3 days ago, which was, she understood now, approximately 3 days after the truth had already set everything in motion. The Thornwood Collective had been in a quiet territorial dispute with the hegemony of the Verk for 11 years. 11 years of careful, grinding diplomacy. 11 years of paper and subcommittees, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from trying very hard to do something that the other party has no genuine intention of allowing you to accomplish. The collective wanted navigation rights through the Verk Passage, a corridor of space between two dead systems that the Verk considered sovereign territory, despite the fact that they had not physically inhabited it in 300 years. The Verk wanted the collective to stop pressing. The Compact wanted everyone to stop making their quarterly reports complicated. Into this impasse, approximately 4 months ago, someone had introduced a weapon. Not a physical weapon, a lie. Specifically, someone had filed a series of communications under diplomatic seal that purported to show the Thornwood Collective secretly negotiating an arms agreement with the Veth Collective, the Verk's oldest enemy. The communications were detailed. They were time-stamped. They were, to anyone examining them without the specific cryptographic key that would reveal their falsification, entirely convincing. The Verk had received copies. The Verk had taken them to the Compact Tribunal. The Compact Tribunal had convened an emergency session that had been going on for 11 days and had just resulted in the mobilization of the fleet. Kara was watching through the observation window. The Thornwood Collective was facing sanctions, possible expulsion from the Compact. The navigation dispute had, in the space of 4 months, metastasized into something that could end 70 years of careful peace-building and leave her people more isolated than they had been before her grandmother was born. And the encryption on the false communications. She had obtained a fragment through a contact in the tribunal's administrative office who owed her a favor and did not ask questions, was the same encryption she had seen on the second terminal under the false floor panel in the storage annex. She had sat with that information for 6 hours before she did anything with it. She had sat with her bark tea cooling in her hands, and she had gone through her ledger, entry by entry, with the methodical attention of someone who already knows what they are going to find, but needs to be certain before they do what comes next. Then she had gone to find Aldrich Varen. He was in his office when she came in. He was standing at his observation port with his back to the door, which meant he had heard her coming and had chosen not to turn around. That told her something. She filed it. "You knew I'd find out," she said, not a question. The silence stretched for 4 seconds. She counted. Then he turned and his face was, she noted this with the part of her that was still taking notes even now, genuinely tired. Not calculated, not performing regret for an audience. Tired in the way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally been permitted to set it down. "I told myself you wouldn't," he said. "I was wrong. The communications were yours." "Yes. You fabricated evidence of a Thornwood arms negotiation." "Yes." She waited. In her experience, when people confess to one thing, they often stop there, as if the single admission discharged the full debt. She had learned to wait. He did not disappoint her. After a moment, looking at a point slightly to the left of her face, he said, "The Verk were going to collapse the passage talks anyway. I had intelligence, real intelligence, not manufactured, that they were preparing to formally close negotiation and present the compact with a fait accompli. Closed corridor, permanent. Your people's trade routes through the inner ring cut by 30% within a decade." He paused. "I thought if I gave them a reason to take the dispute to the tribunal rather than close it unilaterally, the formal process would force a more equitable resolution. You thought that manufacturing evidence of a crime my people did not commit would, through the procedural mechanics of a tribunal hearing, result in a better outcome for my people than the crime you were preventing them from committing against us." He looked at her then, directly. The tiredness in his face was still there, but there was something else under it, not quite shame, not quite defiance, the uncomfortable cousin of both. I thought I could control it, he said. I thought the tribunal process would run its course at the committee level, generate enough diplomatic pressure on the Werk to reopen talks, and be quietly buried. I thought the falsification would be found and acknowledged in chambers before it went public. I thought. You thought a great many things, Kara said, and you did not tell me any of them. There it was, the center of it, not the geopolitics she could have, in theory, with great difficulty and significant personal cost, understood the geopolitics. The compact was full of people who committed small treasons in the name of preventing larger ones, and some of those people were not wrong in any way she could point to cleanly. She had grown up in a tradition that valued the hard choice over the clean hands. Her grandmother had made choices that the history songs were careful not to name directly. But this. He had known for 4 months that the ground under her feet was false. He had watched her file her reports, attend her briefings, advocate for her people in the small daily ways that were her work and her identity. He had watched her trust the process he was corrupting. He had come back to her in the evenings and sat across that narrow table and let her go on believing that the work she was doing meant something, that the architecture of diplomacy she was operating inside was, however slow and frustrating, real. He had let her be wrong about the world she was standing in. I was going to tell you, he said, when it was resolved, when I could show you it had worked. And if it hadn't worked. He didn't answer. She watched his face and understood. He had not planned for that. Or rather, he had planned for it the way a man who is very good at winning plans for the possibility of losing, which is to say, not really. The fleet outside, she said. How long before they reach a verdict? The tribunal will reconvene in 6 hours. With the evidence on the table, your contact shared the fragment widely, which I assume you know. They'll verify the falsification within a day. 2 at most. And then the charges against the collective are dropped. The Werk lose the tribunal's support for their position. The talks reopen under compact supervision. He said it flatly, without inflection. A man reciting outcomes. It works out. For my people. Yes. Not for you. No. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the tired lines of his face and the steady set of his shoulders and the way his hands hung at his sides, loose, the posture of a man who has stopped bracing for impact because impact has arrived. She looked at the 700 small accumulated kindnesses that lived in her memory alongside the ledger, all the mornings and evenings and conversations, and the particular way he had of listening to her talk about the Thornwood Mountains, as though the mountains were personally important to him, by virtue of being important to her. She filed all of it. Then she said, I'm going to the tribunal. He didn't move. I know. I'm going to tell them I found the fragment. I'm going to tell them the encryption matches communications that passed through this station. I'm going to give them everything they need to verify the falsification and close the case against the collective. That will end my career. Yes. He nodded once. The movement was small and final, like a door being closed. Will you? He stopped, started again. Is there anything? No, she said. She picked up her bag from where she had set it by the door. She had packed it before she came in. She was, it turned out, better at planning for outcomes than he was. There's nothing. She went to the door. She stopped there, not because she needed to, but because something in her required a moment. Not a pause of weakness, not hesitation, but the particular stillness of a person who is marking a boundary between what was and what comes next. I want to tell you something, she said, without turning around, so you understand what you actually did. She heard him not move, waiting. You made a decision about what was good for my people without asking my people. You chose to act inside a process that I was also acting inside, and you let me go on acting inside it without telling me the ground had shifted. You took the work I was doing and made it into a performance for an audience that knew something I didn't. She kept her voice level. The levelness was not detachment. The levelness was everything she had, applied to the problem of speaking clearly. You decided that your judgment was sufficient, that your plan was good enough to justify keeping me in the dark. And maybe the plan works. Maybe the tribunal clears the collective and the Verk lose leverage and the talks reopen, and it all comes out the way you calculated it would. She paused. That doesn't change what you decided about me. The silence behind her felt different from silence usually felt, denser. I would have helped you, she said. If you'd come to me, if you'd told me what you were trying to do and why, I would have argued with you. I might have told you it was wrong. I might have found a different way or agreed with your way or convinced you there was no way and we had to accept the loss. I don't know. We never had that conversation. She finally moved, her hand finding the door. You made sure we never had it. She walked out. The corridor was standard Farron station issue. Pale composite walls, lighting calibrated for human comfort at a color temperature that always made her skin look slightly wrong to her. The low ambient hum of life support and recycled air, and the 1,000 small machines keeping everyone alive in the void. She walked through it without hurrying. She nodded to a compact administrator she recognized from the translation pool. She stopped at a water dispenser and drank a cup of water slowly, the way her grandmother had taught her to drink when she was trying to be calm, deliberately, attending to each swallow, treating the simple act of drinking as though it required her full professional attention. It helped somewhat. By the time she reached the tribunal liaison office, she was as steady as she was going to get. The liaison on duty was a small, intense Vethian woman named Prista who wore the dark blue collar of the compact's investigative arm, and who had, in Kara's experience, the focused energy of someone who was always 3 steps ahead of the conversation they were having. She looked up when Kara came in, assessed the bag on Kara's shoulder and whatever was visible in her face, and said nothing beyond. I'll clear the room. The room cleared. Kara sat down. She produced from her bag a data chip and a sealed folio and set them both on the table. I have evidence of document falsification in the Thornwood Verk matter, she said. I have the cryptographic fragment identifying the source terminal. I have a chain of custody I can testify to, and I need you to understand something before we proceed. She looked at Prista steadily. I am giving you this freely. I am giving you this because it is true and because my people need the truth to be known. I am not doing this in exchange for anything. I am not doing this because I was coerced. I am doing this because it is the right action, and the right action should not require a reason beyond that. Prista looked at the chip and the folio for a long moment. Then she looked at Kara. All right, she said, and reached for the chip. What followed was 12 hours of the most thorough documentation process Kara had ever participated in. The tribunal's investigative division was, whatever its other failings, meticulous. They questioned her 4 times from different angles, with different examiners, and each time she answered the same things in the same words, because the truth did not require variation. They verified the cryptographic fragment against 6 independent databases. They pulled the terminal records from the station's maintenance logs, records that Varen, it turned out, had not known existed, because they were maintained by the station's automated systems and were not visible to human-level administrative oversight. They found 7 additional falsified documents she had not found herself. Between examination sessions, they put her in a waiting room. The waiting room had a water dispenser and 3 chairs of the compact's universal design, which meant they were built to accommodate human proportions and were slightly too short for her in a way that she had stopped noticing after 6 months on Farron Station, and had started noticing again now that she was paying attention to everything. She sat in one of them and pressed her back very straight and breathed. She was thinking about her mother. Her mother, Selin, had been a trade negotiator for the collective before she retired to the Thornwood Highlands to raise Kara and her younger brother in a house built into the side of a hill that had been continuously inhabited for 800 years. Her mother had traveled the compact routes for 17 years, which meant she had spent 17 years being the tallest person in most rooms, the greenest-skinned person in all of them, and the person who was most frequently assumed, on first encounter, to be someone's security detail rather than the lead negotiator. She had developed, over those 17 years, a specific manner for those first encounter moments. She would look at the person who had made the assumption, very calmly, and say nothing whatsoever until the silence became educational. She had taught Kara that silence. She had taught it by example rather than instruction, the way the Thornwood people taught most important things. Kara had been 12 and accompanying her mother on a posting to the Verk Outer Territories. Not the first time she had traveled, but the first time she had been old enough to be present in actual meeting rooms rather than waiting outside them. And she had watched her mother deploy that particular silence 3 times in 2 days and had understood, the third time, that it was not a technique for making other people uncomfortable. It was a technique for making space for the truth to exist in without anyone filling it with something more convenient. Kara had been using it ever since. She had used it in Varen's office. She had used it in this room in the first examination, when one of the investigators had asked a question that contained an embedded assumption she chose not to dignify by arguing with. She had let the assumption sit in the air until the investigator heard it himself, and then he had rephrased, and they had continued. She drank her water and thought about her mother's silence and waited. The second examiner was different from the first, younger, compact human, with the slightly over-careful enunciation of someone who had trained in formal, standard rather than growing up speaking it. She asked careful questions. She was genuinely trying to understand the technical aspects of the cryptographic fragment, and Kara helped her, because the investigator's understanding mattered for the case, and the case mattered for her people, and there was no reason to withhold competence from a process that was trying to reach the truth. The third examiner was a Verk. Kara had expected this and had prepared for it, which meant she had thought through the specific forms of Verk courtesy that applied to a formal adversarial inquiry, and had decided which ones to observe and which to set aside. The Verk were a formal people, not cold, which was the misunderstanding, but formalized, which was different. They had rituals for every transition between modes of relation, entering a room, acknowledging a shared truth, disagreeing, accepting a correction. The rituals were not performative. They were functional, the way the Thornwood songs were functional. They created a shared context in which the hard things could be said safely. The Verk examiner, whose name was Directress Ohavin, observed all the correct forms on entering. Kara observed the Thornwood equivalents. They regarded each other across a table and understood, she thought, that they were in an unusual position, representatives of 2 parties that had been placed in official conflict by a deception neither of them had committed, now working together inside the mechanism that was untangling that deception. There was something almost elegant about it. Ohavin's questions were precise and assumed more technical knowledge than the other examiners had. Kara answered at the same level. There was a specific exchange about signal encoding that lasted 15 minutes and that Kara found, despite everything, genuinely interesting. Ohavin was sharp, the kind of person who was good at the work for its own sake and would have been worth talking to under any circumstances. At the end of it, Ohavin closed her notes and looked at Kara directly and said, in a register that was slightly more personal than the formal inquiry tone, "Your knowledge of the encryption architecture, where is it from?" "My father," Kara said. "He was a war commander before the peace." "The Thornwood peace," Ohavin nodded. "I know of it. He kept the technical knowledge current. He said it was irresponsible not to. He wanted me to be able to recognize the tools that were being used around me." She paused. He was right. Ohavin looked at her for a moment, and then she said something that Kara did not expect. I read your diplomatic record when your name appeared in this matter. You have been, in my directorate's assessment, the most effective advocate for the collective's position in the passage talks in 11 years. Not because you were aggressive, because you were precise. She closed her folio. I am sorry for the situation you were placed in. It was a formal apology, Verk style. It acknowledged a wrong without allocating blame. A wrong had occurred, the wrong had touched her. The apology did not pretend the situation was simple. Kara received it correctly. Noted and accepted, she said. Let's finish this. The fourth examination was the shortest. A single investigator, the most senior one, who went through the chain of custody one more time with the particular focus of someone preparing to stake a career on its integrity. Kara walked through it from the beginning. The investigator listened without writing anything down. At the end he said, "You understand that your testimony will be the centerpiece of the tribunal's case." "I understand." "You understand that the person you are testifying against has direct knowledge of your professional record and your personal circumstances, and will have access to legal representation that will use both in his defense." "I understand." "You understand that this will be public, that it will be recorded, that the Compact's archives will contain your name in relation to this proceeding." "I understand." She looked at him steadily. "I was raised by a people who sing everything into stone. I am not afraid of the record. I'm contributing to it." The investigator wrote something down then. She thought it might have been his first note in the entire session. He closed his folio and stood and extended his hand, the human gesture which she had long since learned to receive naturally. She shook it. "The tribunal reconvenes in 9 hours, he said. "We'll need you there." At the 9-hour mark, one of the examiners, a heavy-set Verk diplomat with the gray-banded facial markings of the senior administrative caste, came into the room where she was waiting and stood across the table from her, and did something she had not expected. He bowed. It was not a large bow. It was the small, precise bow of his people's tradition, the one that acknowledged a debt without specifying its nature. She knew enough of Verk custom to understand what it meant. I was wrong about you. Not your people, you specifically. And that is noted. She inclined her head in return, the Thornwood acknowledgement that means, recorded and accepted, let us say no more about it. Neither of them spoke. The examiner left. She went back to waiting. The tribunal reconvened 14 hours after she had walked into Prista's office. She sat in the observer gallery. She was not a party to the proceedings, only a witness, and the distinction mattered, and watched the 300-year-old machinery of interplanetary justice work through the evidence she had provided with the slow, grinding certainty of something that could not be hurried and did not need to be. The gallery was full. She had not expected that. The Farron station was a working diplomatic post, not a seat of government, and this was supposed to be a closed emergency session. But the Compact's definition of closed, it turned out, accommodated roughly 200 observers in formal dress filling every tiered seat of the chamber, representatives from 12 signatory species, administrative staff who had found procedural reasons to be present, 2 journalists who covered the outer ring tribunal circuit and had clearly been tipped off and had clearly gotten here fast, and in the gallery's upper tier, barely visible from where Kara sat, 3 Thornwood diplomatic staff who had been stationed at a secondary Compact office 2 transit hubs over, and who had apparently gotten on a ship the moment word reached them. She recognized one of them, Pren, her senior colleague who had been with the collective's delegation since before she was posted to Farron. He was 62 years old and had been negotiating with humans and Verk and a dozen other species since before Kara's father finished his service, and he had a face that gave away almost nothing. But when he saw her in the gallery, his chin moved, the Thornwood elder's small nod, the one that meant, "You did correctly." She let herself receive it. She would think about what it cost her later. Right now there was work still to do. the adjudicator of the tribunal, was the oldest person Kara had ever seen. She did not know the adjudicator's species with certainty. The records listed her origin as a world in the outer reach, whose name transliterated into compact, standard as something like the deep patient green, and her physical form was extraordinary. 6 limbs, 2 of which served as both arms and secondary legs depending on her needs, a face of extraordinary surface complexity, eyes that were milky and vast, and moved independently of each other in a way that, once you understood it, suggested she was always attending to multiple things simultaneously. She wore cloud-gray robes in the formal style of the old compact, the ones that predated the current administrative structure by 400 years, and she sat in the adjudicator's seat with the absolute stillness of something that had been in exactly this place, doing exactly this work, for so long that the place had simply become an extension of her. She was very old. Kara did not know the precise figure, but the tribunal records indicated the current adjudicator had held the seat for 117 years, which meant she had taken it when Kara's grandmother was a young woman making her own hard choices in the Thornwood Hills. She had sat in this chamber or in chambers like it and heard cases involving species that no longer existed, disputes over territories that had been remapped 3 times, crimes that had been committed by people who were long dead, and whose victims were also long dead, but whose consequences were still moving through the systems of the compact like ripples from stones thrown into still water a century ago. That was the other thing about the adjudicator. She was, by all accounts, not merely intelligent but patient in the deep structural way of something that had outlived most of the categories it operated in. She did not have the compact's urgency. She had its memory. Kara watched her during the presentation of evidence and felt something she had not expected, a specific and serious respect. Not awe, exactly. She was a Thornwood Highland woman, and she had grown up among elder trees that remembered in their grain the details of a civilization older than the compact, and she was not easily awed by age alone. But the adjudicator's quality of attention was something particular. She listened to the evidence as though each piece of it were its own complete thing, not building toward a conclusion but simply existing, and she held it with the same patient weight she gave everything. Nothing was procedural to her. Nothing was routine. Every piece of the case received the same serious attendance of a very old mind that had decided, apparently some time ago, that the correct way to hold power was to take nothing lightly. When the evidence was presented, she listened without expression. When the Verk representative tried twice to introduce supplementary arguments, she silenced them with a gesture so small it was barely visible from the gallery. When the compact advocates presented their summary, she listened to all of it and then held silence for exactly 45 seconds, Kara counted, before speaking. The adjudicator's voice was low and very clear, with the particular quality of something that had practiced carrying across large spaces for a long time. She spoke in the compact's formal register, which was archaic and precise, and left no room for ambiguity. She said, "The falsification is verified. The charges against the Thornwood Collective are without foundation. The proceedings are closed. The navigation dispute is remanded for renegotiation under compact supervision, with the Verk hegemony required to enter talks in good faith under penalty of the compact's full diplomatic instrument. Any party found to be acting in bad faith will face immediate sanctions." Then she paused. She said, "The individual responsible for the falsification will be tried under the compact's statute on diplomatic fraud. The penalties are significant. This court notes for the record that the falsification was discovered and disclosed by a member of the injured party who had every personal reason to remain silent and chose not to. This court further notes that this choice was not made from self-interest and not made under compulsion. It was made because it was correct. The court records its appreciation." There was a sound in the chamber, not quite applause. The tribunal chamber did not permit applause, but the collective exhalation and the murmur and the shift of bodies that meant the same thing. Kara sat very still in the observer gallery and felt something in her chest that was not triumph. It was closer to the feeling that comes at the end of a very long effort. Not joy, not relief, but the particular quiet of completion. The awareness that a thing you have been carrying has been set down, and the place where you were carrying it aches a little with the absence, and you stand there attending to the ache before you decide what to pick up next. She stayed in the gallery until it emptied. She listened to the footsteps and the voices and the distant procedural announcements until the room was quiet. Then she sat in the quiet for a while. She was thinking about a morning about 4 months ago, before she had found the terminal, before she had started the ledger in earnest. She had been sitting at the narrow table with her bark tea, and Aldrich Varon had been reading something on his tablet, and outside the port the Farron station's automated lighting system had been cycling through its morning simulation. The way it increased the light temperature gradually to approximate a sunrise, even though there was no sun in immediate evidence, and the concept of morning on a deep space station was entirely arbitrary. She had watched the light change and drunk her tea and felt, simply, that she was in the right place. She had been wrong about what place she was in, but the feeling itself, the simple animal sense of being where you were meant to be, she did not regret having felt it. She filed it in a different ledger, not the one for deceptions. The one for things that were genuinely theirs, regardless of what came after. It was not much, it was not nothing. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the tribunal chamber and into the corridor, and then through the corridor to the main transit hub of the Farron station, where the ships came and went, and the whole complicated machinery of the compact moved its living cargo from one piece of the dark to another. She did not go back to the quarters she had shared with Varon. She had packed everything she needed before she walked into his office. That, too, had been a kind of truth-telling. She had known before she confronted him how this would end, and she had prepared accordingly, and she had gone to him anyway. Not because she did not know. Because knowing is not the same as having said it out loud, and some things need to be said out loud, not for the other person but for yourself. The transit hub was busy. It was always busy. The Farron station sat at the intersection of 3 major shipping lanes and the compact's outer diplomatic ring, and at any given hour it was processing the passage of 400 different travelers through a space designed for 250. She moved through the crowd the way she had learned to move through difficult environments, efficiently, without urgency, attending to the space around her rather than fighting it. At the departure board, she found the listing for the Thornwood Courier, a small, fast ship that made the run between Farron and the collective's outer territories every 9 days. She was 3 days from its next scheduled departure. She booked a berth. She found a station hostel in the mid-ring and paid for 3 nights with her diplomatic per diem, which was still active and would be for another 30 days regardless of what the tribunal determined about her official posting. She ate. She slept. She did these things with the methodical attention she brought to everything, because eating and sleeping were not optional even when you had just spent 12 hours in a tribunal testimony and watched the person you had been living alongside be formally charged with a crime and understood, finally, with the kind of clarity that does not leave room for negotiation, that a chapter of your life was closed. She spent the first evening writing a report for the collective's diplomatic council. It took 4 hours, and she wrote it in the Thornwood's formal register, which demanded precision and disallowed euphemism, and required you to say exactly what had occurred and in what sequence and to whom it could be attributed. The formal register was uncomfortable to write in when the subject matter was personal, which was, she thought, precisely the point of it. The discomfort was information. It told you where you were tempted to soften things that should not be softened, where you were inclined to arrange events to cast a more forgiving light, where your own investment in the story was pulling the account slightly off true. She noted each of those places and corrected them. When she was finished, She read the report back and it was accurate. Not comfortable. Accuracy and comfort were often in direct conflict, which was something the people who objected to the Thornwood formal register tended not to understand, but accurate. It said, a human diplomatic coordinator in the employ of the Compact's Outer Ring administration fabricated evidence of a Thornwood-Verk arms negotiation. It said, the fabrication was discovered by a Thornwood diplomatic attaché who provided the evidence to the tribunal and testified fully. It said, the charges against the collective were dismissed. It said, the individual responsible is now facing prosecution under Compact statute. It said, the navigation dispute is remanded for renegotiation under Compact supervision, with the Verk required to negotiate in good faith. It did not say, the individual responsible was someone I had been living with for 2 years who I believed was honest in the ways that mattered. It did not say that because the collective's diplomatic council did not need to know it for the purposes of the report, and because the formal register required that you include only what was functionally relevant to the events being described. She wrote that last part in a separate document that she did not send to anyone. She wrote it because she was a Thornwood person and she had been taught that the record mattered, and some records were private, and both things were true simultaneously. Private document said, I kept a ledger. I should have kept it from the beginning. I let myself believe the ledger was unnecessary, not because I trusted blindly, but because I wanted the thing I had to be what I thought it was, and I permitted that wanting to be slightly louder than the part of me that was already noticing. I am noting this not as self-accusation but as information. The part of me that notices does not require distrust as its natural condition. It requires attention. I will pay it better attention. She read that back too. It was also accurate. On the second day, she received a message. It came through the station's formal communications system, not a personal channel. It was marked for her attention in Varen's handwriting, which she recognized. She looked at it for a moment before she opened it. The message was not long. He did not beg. He did not explain further than he already had. He said, I understood what you meant, about what I decided. I understood it more clearly after you said it than I had before, which is a failing I will have to account for. I am not asking for anything from you. I am telling you that the thing you said about the conversation we never had, I have been thinking about it. I think you were right that I was capable of having it. I chose not to because I was afraid you would talk me out of something I wanted to do. That is a worse thing than I let myself believe it was. I don't know what to do with that. I'm going to have to find out. She read it twice, then she wrote back. She wrote, I know you believed you were acting for my people. I believe that too. I want you to understand that this does not resolve it. Acting for someone when you have decided without their knowledge is a form of possession. You possessed my cause. You carried it the way you wanted to carry it and told yourself you were carrying it for me. The care was real. The possession was real. Both can be true. She sent it. She did not wait for a response. She packed what she needed from the hostel, which was everything she had, and walked to the departure dock 3 days early because the courier had made good time and was accepting early boarding. The ship was small, clean-lined and practical, the way Thornwood design always was, her people built for durability and sufficiency, not for impression. She found her berth, which was narrow and smelled of the compressed wood fiber that Thornwood engineers used as interior paneling, a material that carried a faint biological warmth that was entirely different from the synthetic surfaces of the Compact's standard construction. She put her bag down. She sat on the edge of the berth. She was going home. This was not a metaphor. She was physically going to the place she had come from, to the stone cities and the elder trees and the mountains whose light her grandmother had described as the color of her eyes. She was going to file a full report with the collective's diplomatic council. She was going to provide testimony to the Compact's tribunal for as long as they needed it. She was going to continue doing the work she had always done, because the work was real and it mattered, and it had always been hers regardless of the ground it stood on being altered by someone who did not tell her. She was also going home in the other sense, the one that did not have a simple address. She was going back to the self she had been before she allowed someone else's judgment to stand in for her own. She had done that. She was honest enough to note it in the ledger. Not all at once and not under coercion, but in the small incremental way that happens when you trust someone and trust becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a structure, and one day the structure is the thing you're standing in instead of the thing you built. She had built it, she could dismantle it, the materials were hers. The courier ship moved. She felt it in the walls first, the vibration of the engine coming alive, and then in her body, the shift of weight as the docking clamps released and the artificial gravity adjusted, and the ship began to move away from the Farron station through the dark. She looked out the small port beside her berth. The station was already shrinking behind them. All those lights, all that machinery, all those people doing their work in the dark between stars. The fleet had begun to disperse, the 17 Meridian warships and the 3 tribunal carriers pulling away to their respective postings now that the emergency had resolved into procedure. They moved with the slow, massive grace of very large things that had achieved their purpose and were returning to the ordinary business of being large. The Farron station's observation bays were small and bright against its hull. She could not, from this distance, have identified which one she had sat in the day before, watching the fleet mobilize and knowing what she knew. She looked at all of them anyway, the undifferentiated small windows of a place she was leaving. Then she stopped looking. She turned from the port and lay down on the berth and looked at the wood fiber ceiling, which was the color of the hills east of her city in autumn, which was a color she had not seen in 2 years. She thought about her grandmother, who had made the hard choices that the history songs did not name. She thought about what it meant to act rightly inside a situation that had been badly made by someone else. Not to redeem the situation, not to fix what had been broken, but simply to do the correct thing because it was correct, and to let that be sufficient. Her grandmother's name had been Sarah. She had been a war commander's mate in the old tradition, which in the Thornwood practice was not a domestic role but a formal one. The person who held the account of costs alongside the account of strategy, who carried the specific and formal authority to say, "This decision will cost more than it wins, I am recording this, we will remember." Not a veto, not a check, a witness, an official keeper of the full reckoning. Sarah had exercised that authority twice, in the war that the history songs remembered obliquely. The first time, she had been overruled. The second time, the commander had listened, and that second decision was recorded as the one that ended the war 3 years earlier than anyone had expected and preserved something that a longer conflict would have destroyed. Not territory, people, a specific kind of people, the ones who remembered how to do certain things that could not be relearned from books once the people who knew them were gone. Kara had asked her grandmother once when she was 17, "How did you know the second time would be different? How did you know he would listen?" Sarah had looked at her with the amber eyes that Kara had inherited, and she had said, "I didn't. I said it because it needed saying, not because I knew he would hear it. You don't get to control whether they hear it. You only get to control whether you said it." Kara understood that better now than she had at 17. Her grandmother had told her once that the Thornwood people's greatest misunderstanding of themselves was the belief that they were a warrior culture. "We are not," her grandmother had said. "We are a culture that remembers. We sing everything into the wood and the stone and we carry it forward and we do not let it be forgotten. The fighting is incidental. The memory is the practice." Kara thought she would remember this accurately. Not Varen the villain, because that was simple and he was not simple. Not Varen the well-intentioned, because that was exculpatory and the truth was not exculpatory. She would remember a man who was capable of more than he gave and who had, in the specific instance that mattered most to her, given less. She would remember a plan that worked by the metrics it had set for itself, and failed by every metric that had not been included, and she would carry the knowledge of what had been excluded and why. She would remember what it felt like to walk into a room already knowing and speak clearly anyway. That particular combination, the knowing, and the speaking, and the choosing to speak even though knowing made speaking harder rather than easier, she would carry that. Not as a wound, as a fact about herself, as evidence of what she was capable of when the situation required it. The ship moved through the dark, she breathed. Outside the port, the stars were doing what stars always did, which was simply existing, reliably, at their enormous distances, indifferent to the small, warm things moving between them. She thought, I will get home and I will walk into the hills and I will find the oldest elder tree and I will put my hand on its bark and I will let it record what happened. That is what the trees are for, not to judge, not to advise, to remember with you so you are not remembering alone. She thought, I am already halfway there. She was not crying. She had cried, alone in the hostel on the first night, with the efficient thoroughness she brought to things that needed doing, and she was finished with that part. What she was now was something quieter, something that did not have a name in compact standard. In the Thornwood language, there was a word for it, Kethara. It meant approximately the state of having fully acknowledged a thing, having incorporated its truth into yourself, and being ready to continue. It did not translate well. The concept that something might need to be fully acknowledged before you could move forward, that you could not simply decide to be past a thing, that the through path required actually going through, was not a concept that compact standard had built itself to express. She was Kethara, or she was becoming it, which was close enough. The Farron station had long since disappeared behind them. There was only dark and stars, and the ship moving, and the faint warm smell of wood fiber, and the knowledge that in 12 days she would be standing on ground that knew what she was. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark behind her eyes and she went through the ledger one more time, not to add to it but to close it, entry by entry. This happened, this happened, this happened, this is what it meant. She reached the end of it. She held the last entry for a moment. Then she let the ledger go. Not forgetting, never forgetting, the Thornwood people did not forget. It was not in their nature and she would not have wanted it to be. But the ledger had served its purpose. It had been a tool for accuracy when accuracy was what the situation required. The situation had been resolved as accurately as she could manage. The tool could rest now. What remained, when the ledger was closed, was not emptiness. She had half expected emptiness and was mildly surprised to find it wasn't. What remained was the shape of everything she had carried into the situation and brought back out. Her judgment, her honesty, her grandmother's word Kethara, the knowledge that she had acted correctly in a situation that had been made incorrectly around her, the evidence of her own capacity that she had not had before because she had not needed it before. She had needed it, she had used it, she had it now. The ship hummed around her. The dark moved past the port, enormous and patient, and completely indifferent to the fact that she was having one of the more significant moments of her life in a small berth on a courier vessel that smelled like autumn hills. She found that she did not mind the indifference. The dark had not betrayed her. The dark was simply the dark, doing its one simple job, which was being the enormous context in which all the small, warm, complicated things did theirs. She breathed. She thought 12 days. She thought elder trees. She thought, I know what I am. The ship moved on. Back on the Farron station, in an office that now felt 3 sizes too large, Aldrich Farron sat with his hands flat on his desk, and his second communications terminal open in front of him, not because he needed to use it, but because the Compact's investigative division had sealed the room, and he was waiting for the next procedural step, and there was nothing else to look at. The terminal's screen was showing the last outgoing communication it had sent. He had read it perhaps 40 times. It looked the same each time. efficient and purposeful and completely correct in its own terms, and utterly blind to every term it hadn't included. He was thinking about a conversation he hadn't had. He was trying to imagine having it, sitting across that narrow table with his bark tea and telling Kara what he was planning, watching her face change, listening to what she said, following the argument wherever it went. He kept stalling out. Not because he couldn't imagine what she would have said. He could, actually, quite clearly, and the clarity was not comfortable, but because of the moment just before it. The moment in which he would have had to decide that her judgment mattered more than his certainty. That was where the conversation had stopped before it started. Not cruelty, not contempt, just certainty, wearing the clothes of care so convincingly that he had not noticed what it was actually wearing. He was noting this about himself with the reluctant attention of someone who has been wrong about a thing that cost more than they intended to pay. Outside the observation port, the last of the fleet was dispersing. The compact tribunal carriers were dwindling to bright points moving against the fixed stars. In a few minutes they would fold space and be gone entirely, and the view from this port would be what it always was, the long dark, and the stars in it, and the small bright spark of the Thornwood courier somewhere in the distance, moving steadily in the direction of home. He looked at the courier's transponder signal on his secondary display. He had not meant to open it. He had opened it anyway, and now he was looking at the small moving point of light and thinking. She knew before she came in. She had already packed. She had already decided, and she came and said the hard thing anyway, and she did not need his understanding to make it true, and she had left. He had thought he was the one who prepared for outcomes. It turned out she was simply better at it. The transponder signal moved. He watched it for a while, then he closed the display. There was a great deal of work ahead of him, not the interesting work of plans and contingencies and the secondary terminals, but the difficult, ordinary, procedural work of accounting, tribunals, reviews, the institutional machinery that existed precisely to deal with people who had decided their judgment was sufficient. He would participate in it fully. He would not lie about any of it. He would answer every question the same way every time, with the same words in the same order, because he had learned recently, from someone better at it than he was, that the truth did not require variation. He had understood what she meant when she said it. He had understood it more clearly after, as he'd told her. He was understanding it still in new ways, and he expected that would continue for some time. He sat with his hands flat on his desk. Outside the port, the stars held their distances. The last carrier folded and was gone, and the dark was just the dark again, enormous and patient and full of the small, warm, complicated things making their way through it, doing their work, carrying what they carried, remembering what they remembered. One of those things was 12 days from home. That seemed right. That seemed in its way like a correct outcome, not easy, not clean, but correct, which is, as she had known, and he was learning, a different thing and a more durable one. The room was very quiet. The investigation team would be back shortly. Until then, there was only the hum of the station and the light of the stars and the particular silence of a man who had run out of things he could fix and was beginning, with difficulty, to sit with what he could not. Far away, the courier moved through the dark, steady and purposeful, toward the stone cities and the elder trees and the mountains lit like amber fog. She was going home. She was already, in every way that mattered, there.